We still hear this kind of nonsense like capitalism causes poverty. It's just abject nonsense. And, as he takes pains to point out, it's actually the absence of capitalism that causes poverty. What's wrong with poor countries is that the per capita quota of capital invested is extremely low when compared with the capital investment in a rich country. And if you want an example of this, you don't have to look any farther than what's happening in India right now, which is absolutely heartbreaking. I wrote a short article on this earlier this week alluding to it. BBC, which I get via brief clips on YouTube. I don't subscribe to anything that gives me BBC like cable, but I do think BBC, for all of its faults, does an excellent job of international coverage, on the ground coverage in many cases. And they've been in India where you have migrant workers from small towns, rural villages in huge cities like Delhi, because that's where the work is. And they're paid very small wages. They're unskilled. They just work day by day. They purchase their food day by day. They either live outside or in very poor accommodations. And so when Modi came along and shut down the nation's economy, these people have very little capital accumulated in their own lives, and they've had very little capital invested in them as workers. They do very simple manual labor by hand. So the minute the economy was shut down, neither they nor the wider economy nor their employers had any savings accumulated to fall back on. So these Indian migrant workers literally, without food, without pay, without shelter, started walking hundreds and hundreds of miles in 40 degrees Celsius heat back to their home villages in hopes that at least their families would be able to give them something to eat, because they have nothing to eat in, let's say, Delhi. And that's not because of capitalism, folks. That's because of the absence of capitalism. It's because in India, there is far less per capita capital accumulation than there is in the United States. And that's why a lot of people in the United States are able to sit at home for a couple months and not work. And we still have food in the grocery stores. We still have gasoline at the pumps. We still have cash coming out of the ATM machines, because America has more capital accumulated and more capital investment to make us more productive and rich. I don't know what more to say about that, but the idea that capitalism is a dirty word and that it impoverishes people, it's the exact opposite is true. Capital accumulation, which is really just what capitalism means, it means someone has a profit or a surplus, which they do not consume. That accumulates. They use that to make investments into productivity, and that makes all of us wealthier. And it's that accumulation which is actually the stuff of civilization itself. So we have to be prepared on principle, not just on from factual argument about minimum wage or something, but on principle. We have to be prepared on principle to fight back about this idea that capitalism produces poverty. Capitalism might create inequality in a sense, because some people get very, very wealthy and some people just get somewhat better off. And in a really poor country, everyone might be sort of more equally bad off. But, there's nothing wrong with that. And that really leads to the point he makes in chapter 36, the crisis of intervention, is that people don't understand that inequality is a fundamental element of market economies. It's a big part of what makes us rich. It's a big part of what goes into the division of labor. And social cooperation is that we all have different talents, unique talents. We're not all the same. And as much as we like to believe it, it's not so easy to just run a company. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can do advanced thermodynamics or calculus. Not everybody can be a brain surgeon. Not everybody can do all kinds of things. We're all unique. We're all different. There's nothing wrong with that. And our goal ought to be to make the poorest people in society, the least among us, materially, not morally, but the least among us in terms of their sustenance, we ought to be trying to make them better off. That should be our overriding concern, especially in a terrible economy like we seem to be entering right now, is we ought to be concerned about the poorest people among us and lifting them up. There's nothing wrong with that. But socialism goes about that in exactly the wrong way. It ignores the actual driver of improvement in people's lives, which is capital accumulation and capital investment. So in chapter 36, The Crisis of Interventionism, he says, well, all of these things that socialists accuse capitalism of, like wars and economic depressions and mass unemployment and famines and what we have right now, a pandemic, which of course isn't caused by capitalism or socialism, is caused by a virus. All of these things are actually not caused by capitalism and are hugely improved by capitalism, by having the ability, the accumulated capital to withstand hardship. And that's what we're seeing. That's why people in America right now are doing better than average people in America are doing better than average people in India. Now, obviously, there's a very wealthy class in each country, but average people. And the simple reason is that we have more capital accumulation here in the United States than we do in India. So he calls interventionism a crisis. And I think what he means by that in this short chapter is that it's a crisis of mindset. So at page 85, when he talks about the metaphysical arguments advanced in favor of a right to sustenance are based on the doctrine of natural right. And we all want everyone around us to have sustenance. We all want everyone around us to have shelter and decent accommodations and decent food to eat and opportunities in life and some chance at an education and some chance to receive health care. But the question is, how do we best accomplish that? The question is not what makes us feel good. And I think a lot of interventionism, and we can think of that as third way thinking, not outright socialism, not laissez-faire capitalism, but some sort of middle point, mixed economy. Interventionism is Mises' term for all of this. Actually doesn't improve things. So he talks a lot in this chapter about inequality, which is still a shibboleth of the left and a boogeyman today. And he gets into a little bit of a discourse of social justice. So that's not a concept that is, or a term that's just brand new in our day. The people have been talking about that for a long time. And he gets into the concept of insecurity. People are insecure about their future ability to sustain themselves. And everyone, I think there's something very natural in human beings that we all fear poverty, and we all fear losing our money or losing our jobs or something. And so he says, that's understandable, but restrictive measures always just restrict the output and the amount of goods available for consumption. So all of these varieties of interference, which we've been talking about throughout this whole part of the book, price controls, wage controls, tariffs, taxes, syndicalism, guilds, protectionism of all stripes. He says all these varieties of interference with the market phenomena not only fail to achieve the ends aimed at, which is the alleviation of poverty, let's say, but bring about a state of affairs which is less desirable than the previous state of affairs. So by definition, by Mises' exposition, every new intervention actually makes us poorer. And ultimately, that's going to hurt the poorest people in society the most. So this is a crisis. And as he points out, the essence of all this interventionist mindset, and that's the crisis in thinking. But the essence of this interventionist mindset is just to take from one group to give to another. And, the whole doctrine of interventionism collapses when this fountain is drained off. Capital responds to incentives. When you tax the rich enough, this is happening in the state of New Jersey right now, even as we speak. There are wealth taxes there and also very punitive real estate taxes, property taxes. When you tax the rich enough, they leave for Florida or they leave for Texas or they do something like that, or they leave America altogether. So you never achieve the results you think you're going to achieve with interventionism. But what you do is you reduce the amount of wealth in a society. And so however you divvy that up, you're divvying up less of it. And I think that's really the key to understanding what this entire part of the book is about. Part 6, again, called The Hampered Market Economy.